Welcome to our Tricky Thursday Live. I was trying to see if I could see it on the computer as well. If
And
you are doing,
I was medically coughing. Did you see that? So I hope it wasn't on screen yet.
I didn't hear it at all.
Okay.
Hopefully, no one else saw it. And I'm
Yeah.
trying to get to it so that I can see your comments and stuff. I think I'm seeing some there. But if you are watching, please give us a like so that it pushes it out to more people because we want everyone to join us. We do this once a month. We switch back and forth between my channel and Charlotta's channel, and it gives us an opportunity to connect with you all, share our pattern knowledge and nerding out. And today we're going to be talking about, both Charlotta and I teach pattern making online, and we have different styles and different backgrounds. So we thought it would be really good to talk about how we got started on this journey and what led us to being here now and the kind of careers that we came from. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today. So we should probably do a little introduction. I'll let Charlotta go first while I'm trying to. I think I can see the chat now, but I want to make sure we can see the
Yes,
chat.
lots
So
of
go
people
ahead.
say hello. So hello everybody. Hello Claire and Carrie and Laura and Captain Bereen and Patricia. So lovely to have you all. So I'm Charlotta. I've got an online membership which is called very originally the School of Pattern Cutting or Pattern Cutting School. And I come from a fashion design and pattern cutting background. And I'm really passionate about teaching everybody to make their own clothes and also that design element. So looking at lots of vintage designs, interpreting it from ourselves, and then making our own clothes from that. So that's my big passion. Both Josh and I are big believers that actually pattern making and fashion is great fun, and everybody can do it, and you can get clothes which fit you and are exactly to your style.
Yes, yes. And we love chatting about it. And also know if you guys have any questions about this, let us know in the chat. I've got it up now. I can see it. So if you have questions about our career, for those of you who don't know, and also you are on my channel, the Creative Costume
Yes.
Academy, please follow. I think I put the link into the description. If not, I will add it later. Please go and follow Charlotta if you're coming
You did.
over from my side. But my name is Trisha. I call myself your pattern nerd friend. Charlotta and I are happily call each other pattern nerds. We just really, really love pattern making and the power that it brings to you. And I know this is also true of Charlotta, but it has such a stigma. Pattern making has such a stigma, unfortunately, and it shies people away. People are scared to learn pattern making, and we are here to say it's so worth it. It's so fun. Anyone can do it. You don't have to go to a big name brand school for years and years and years. Try different methods. And I really feel in my heart and soul that that is my mission on this planet, is to share the joy of pattern making and encourage others to learn who are interested in learning, and that there's so much benefit to making your own patterns, making your own clothing, as far by way of expression and just comfort, and that it's such an amazing skill, and it doesn't have to be hard and it doesn't have to be complicated. You can start doing it right away, and so that's what we're really all about. But we have very different backgrounds, Charlotta and I, so we thought it would be fun to talk about how we got started and where we learned from. Sorry, I was noticing the chat. Carrie said it said something streaming started 2 minutes ago, but I didn't see anything. Is everyone?
I'm watching us on a different account and I can see us, so hopefully
Okay.
It was just a delay. Yeah,
Okay.
I was seeing it.
Yeah,
I know.
I'm kind of in a weird. I'm not on my channel. I'm like in a weird back thing. It's always very. You guys, one thing I know, Charlotta, we've talked about this personally, but we can make anything out of fabric. But this tech stuff, let me tell you, it's a whole new learning curve.
It's like the opposite of pattern cutting, because we teach you knowledge. Like there's one method and then you can make anything. It's like YouTube, every time you do it, something has changed and it's completely
YouTube,
different.
Facebook, it's all different. They're all changing all the time. So we're having to, learn all that stuff too. And it never works how you want it to work, it seems. Patricia says she can see us. Thank you.
That's good.
Okay. And then it looks like somebody had to redo their browser.
Yeah,
So,
the
but
hope.
yeah, please use the chat. We love doing these live streams. Both Charlotta and I are pretty active on Instagram. We're also over at Instagram and here on YouTube, and we share lots of tips with you and just what we love, and we like to get feedback from you. But these Tricky Thursday I have something I call Tricky Thursday on my channel and on my Instagram where I share a tip or trick every Thursday. So look out for those if you haven't already tuned in for that. And so this gives us an opportunity to go live though once a month and connect with you. So we love hearing from you. We love chatting with you. So please don't be shy. Like, let us know what you think and ask us questions. Do you want to start, Charlotta, on like how you got started?
Yes, so I think we actually had probably similar roots, different continents. So
Yeah.
I'm if you can't tell from the accent, I'm German. But I actually studied. I did all my post school training in the UK. So I was very lucky to go to proper fashion school in London. So I went the pure route of fashion design at Central St. Martin's. And I would have to be, I'm slightly conflicted about it because it was a great time. But it's a very specific way of doing fashion. It's very creative. They basically prepare you for being a designer in a big fashion house or doing your own role. But that also means what they don't teach you at all is really practical. It's very limited. Which means on the one hand it's quite good because you really learn to learn everything yourself, to experiment. So that's where I got my joy from, to just having a go rather than always reading 20 books and worrying about it. I love books, but it teaches you at get go. Like, you have to find out how to print, you have to find out how to pattern cut. So it was great in that sense, and it's got quite community. But it left a real lack of sort of practical skills. So I actually after that went back into the specific pattern cutting degree, still at Central St. Martin's, but it's there's a fantastic sort of creative manifest, but it was very technical at the same time. So we work with
So
people
it was
from
more of like that first program was focused more on design, and this other one was focused more on like the pattern cutting and the technical.
But I to be quite interesting, I think a lot of fashion design schools they teach you CAD and they teach you computer programming and sort of very sort of technical things. Central St. Martin's is from the first day. It's basically you get thrown in, and they get you a project brief. You have amazing tutors. We're all from industry, but you might meet once a week, and the rest is all up to you. So the first year wasn't much fun. It's quite depressing unless you like, you know, you can do lots of internships and you already know what you're doing. If you just start, it's really a lot of crying.
Did you sew? I'm curious, did you sew before you went to university?
Yes. So I'm probably same as you. I started sort of sewing aged 14, and I think that's why I got the love, because I used to just get old clothes from my grandmother and cut them and make tiny little mini skirts and tiny tops and stuff like you do as a teenager.
Right.
Yes. Yeah. So I just always had like fun, and like a lot of it was really badly made, but I think you're so proud of it. Like you just wear it, and you're 16 and it looks great.
And that's important to point out is that, you know, Instagram, people don't always post their fails on Instagram, you guys. It's a curated feed of all these beautiful things that people make. And I know that, Charlotta, I know you point out some of your mistakes. And actually, I have a post that I want to point out soon. We still make mistakes. We all started and it was bad. You know, it's just the more you do it, the better you get. So if you are at the beginning stages of your learning, no matter what age you are, it takes time to you know, to learn these skills and to get better. So I just, you know, I did too. I'll talk about mine, but I want to hear more about you.
But I think that's how we bonded as well, because we are both like, you get stuck in, you try things out. Quite often it's not perfect, but you do better next time, you know. Is it relevant? I think it's very, especially I think maybe we're quite lucky because we are before Instagram and online. But you didn't know that there were so many amazing people out there. You just, you know, you could just sort of bear it out on a Saturday night and be happy with it, and you know, you didn't compare yourself to everybody online.
That's true. I think there's more exposure to seeing what else is out there. That's true.
And so like you, I came from a love of sewing, which then got neglected doing fashion design. So I then went back to pattern cutting and then worked as a pattern cutter for a while, but then went back into like a full-time design job. But it's actually having the skills, whatever you do, are fantastic. I think pattern cutting is one of the things, whatever you do in life, it will come in handy, even if it's gardening or, architecture. And
Absolutely.
cutting will be handy.
Well,
So
and
how about you?
I always think that too. Like that's a good point about pattern cutting and pattern making in general. It's funny, my man, he builds with he's kind of a jack of all trades for a lot of other things than fabric, although he did learn sewing in school too, so he's always like, I know how to sew, you want me to show you how to do that? Like if I'm doing something, I'm like, yeah babe, show me. But does woodworking and metalworking and also electrical, which doesn't pertain here. But he every time he sees me talk about patterns or working with patterns, he said it reminds him of like sheet metal work.
Oh, yes.
So pattern making, pattern cutting, all it is taking a 2D flat piece of whatever and figuring out how it's going to create a 3D shape and how that's going to, and, with working with different fabrics, they have different movement and different variables that way, but it can really be applied to, like you said, gardening. I was talking with my cousin who works for Callaway, which is a golf club company. And he was like, oh yeah, we have engineers that come up with how the golf clubs are made. Like it's figuring out how to cover a 3D form
Yes,
in
yeah.
any way that comes up. So it's really a world skill more than just in making clothes. Of course, that's how we know it, but that's a good point to point out. And that's why I really think it's so powerful, and it helped me so much in my career. So we differ in careers, whereas Charlotta came from the fashion industry world. I have and still work in the theatrical industry or live entertainment industry. So um, my path, and I kind of, when I started teaching, I started thinking about where did it really begin for me. And in my most recent free class that I did, I kind of brought up that story because usually I started sewing when I was like 7. My grandmothers both sewed. I'd love to know in the chat. It seems like it
Yes.
either starts with grandma or it starts with mom, right? For a lot of us.
I think it's mostly grandmothers.
I think so
All the
too.
students I've taught teenagers, and they don't do it at school anymore. But the ones who can do it, it's the grandmothers. Because I think you don't listen to your mothers, do you, most of the
That's
time?
true. That's
Yeah,
true.
it's
And
sort
it
of.
was for me, it was we would go, and I kind of want to start doing this with my nephews, but we would go every summer. My sister and I would go and visit this side of the grandparents for like a week or two, and then we'd go to my other side grandparents for like a week or two, give my parents a break, and then we got to spend that time with my grandparents because they didn't live close enough to visit more frequently. And that's what my grandparents would do. That's what my grandma would do. She would have like little crafty things for us to learn to sew and learn to make because they're like, what are we going to do with these kids? So that's where it started for me. I started with like hand embroidery, cross stitch, making little pillows. And then I started to be like, I've always been taller than average, and I was really, really skinny as a kid. So finding clothes was always incredibly hard. And once I started to kind of want things as a kid, um, then I would go to my grandma and I would be like, hey, can we make this, or can we make it this way? And I started to kind of play with things. And the first thing that I remember, and this is where I kind of realized in hindsight that I was making patterns before I even knew what patterns were. Like you said, you were like chopping skirts and it wasn't sewn very well. I mean, I definitely started there, but the first thing I consciously remember was making a dress for Halloween. And because I wanted to be half dead, half alive, my mom wasn't going to let me cut up one of my dresses and put fake blood on it. Because Halloween's, that's where the costume love comes from. It's been through and through my whole life. So I was like, I have to make a dress. Of course, 7-year-old me, have to make a dress, right? So I sat my doll down and I had like this sheet that we got at Goodwill because we used to go to Goodwill all the time. And I'm like, that looks like it could be this. I was always kind of into crafts and arts and stuff as kids, and I patterned her dress just by figuring it out. It was not amazing. It wasn't sewn on the machine, so it fell apart, especially after me cutting up half of it. But I remember that distinctly, like the determination of like, I'm going to make this. And I didn't know what I didn't know at that point, So I just kept kind of going at it that way. making stuff that would come into my mind, like, I want this. And then my grandma, when I would have that time with her, she would show me that I could tweak patterns and like add, interfacing to change the shape. And I was like, ooh, that's cool. And sometimes it'd be successful. Sometimes I'd be like, that didn't work at all. It didn't stretch or whatever. And you kind of learn as you go that way too. And then I started going to, I went to a community college. I was afraid after high school, that I would get bored with continued learning. And so I traveled for a bit and tried to figure out what I wanted to do. I didn't want to go into fashion, and I was kind of involved in theater, but I was like, I don't, I'm not competitive enough or confident enough that I could be like an actress. I didn't want that. So I'm like, so what do I do? Those are my two interests. And somebody kind of mentioned it to me about costume design. And I was like, oh, that's kind of a cool thing I never thought about. So when I came back from traveling, I actually moved to Europe for a year, and then came back and started volunteering at different theaters before I ever went to school. So I just started because who doesn't want free labor? So I was like, hey, I know how to sew. Do you need people to help with costumes? And that was really helpful for me to know what I didn't know. So when I started looking at, when I was like, okay, I need to know history of costumes, like different time periods and what they are, what those silhouettes look like. And then I needed to get better at sewing. Cause when I took like a, sewing wasn't offered in school until I was in high school. So 9 through 12, grade 9 through 12. And I took the sewing class, but I had already been sewing for a little bit by then. So they start with a pillowcase, and I was like, done. And then we do like pajama pants, done. What else are we going to try? And I was so much further ahead than the other students. She was like, can I just give you an A and you help me with the other students? And I'm like, okay. But, I wasn't learning for her at that point.
Yeah.
So when I started looking at schools, I was like, I want to learn about the history. I want to learn about like getting better at sewing. So I went for a costume program. It was a certificate program, not like a degree. So it didn't have any academics. It was purely fashion classes and theater classes. Because again, I was worried I was like going to get overwhelmed with school and kind of give up. That's a common theme in in how I like to learn. So
But I also think it's really sensible. You actually thought it through and tried it out much more than I did. I probably should have done that for a year to actually decide to go outside of education, and actually see what do you do it from the work side, isn't it?
yeah,
Is it
well,
actually something you want to do?
it and that I have to give credit to the guy I was dating at the time, because he was like he was a musician and had his own band, and that was like I was helping him to manage the band, and he was saying that's what he would do. Because I'm like, I don't know what to do, how to get in. And he's like, well, you should go and introduce yourself to these people. And like often I'm like, oh, okay, I'll go try it. I'm never afraid to take advice about guidance.
Yeah.
Um,
And also because you were how old were you back then?
that I was probably like 19.
Yes, I think you in a way you have that sort of but you just go, isn't it? And you just ask. You don't know whether like yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I didn't know that wasn't,
Yeah.
normal or okay or whatever.
Yeah.
And I mean, the reason I picked the school that I ended up going to, I did look at a larger university, and they had an excellent program, but they kind of like looked down on me. They're like, you haven't even
Yeah.
applied yet, because I was just like figuring stuff out. I didn't know. And the teacher and actually she's still a good friend of mine, that was at the program that I ended up going to, she just was kind of all over the place. And like, just, I loved her energy, and I saw a show that they had done, and I was like, tell me more about the program. And I knew that was going to be a fun place to learn. And that's where I took my first pattern making class. And in the fashion side, and it was very fashion, like for people who went in fashion. But once I learned pattern, I was like, oh my God, like this helps me so much, because I have tried to do these things and sometimes work, sometimes didn't. And I'm like, there's a rule that like will get me there faster. It was like, and got to work on shows. I basically just lived in that costume shop. We did shows, and even for, it was a community college, but we just, everybody, the faculty was really passionate about theater and learning, and a lot of the teachers that we had on the fashion side also worked like in the industry or in LA. Like one of our teachers, my grading teacher, was like LA Trade Tech. She worked at also, and a little bit at FITM. So that was really interesting. And so that's where I really discovered that I liked pattern making and that I was kind of had a knack for it. And that teacher, the one that I said that I met, she was like, that's unusual. And I'm like, really? I think it's so fun. And in those theater classes is where I really learned more about drafting. We did draft our sloper and we did learn the principles on the fashion side, but in the costume side was where we learned um, to use old tailoring systems, like historical tailoring systems, and learning how to draft historical garments. And I loved that. Like, I thought that was so cool that you could plug in measurements and end up with like a historical doublet, like an Edwardian doublet. We learned about corset making and things like that. And I was like, this is awesome that you can do this. And so when she said to me, you kind of have this knack for pattern making, you should follow that, because in a costume shop, I'm not sure, I'm curious to hear like how it's set up in a fashion factory, because I've heard, but I've never worked in one. But in a costume shop, you'll have it'll be different teams of people if you're working on a big show, but you'll have like the designer, and then they will have their draper or pattern maker is kind of second in command, and then from that you have the first hand, which will take the pattern, cut everything out of fabric, and relay information to the stitcher. And you'll have like a couple of stitchers who are building everything. And then the first hand and the draper and the designer, not always the first hand, but the draper and the designer will do the fittings and then relay. We're all there in one section working on one show is typically how I've experienced it. And so when my professor was telling me about pattern making, she was like, it's higher, right, in command, so that's usually a more advanced skill, so you get paid more. And I was like, oh, cool. Good for me, that I like that. And so she encouraged me, after I finished that certificate program, to go more into the technical side and maybe start going for my degree. And so I went into a fashion school. I looked at FITM, Fashion Institute of Design and Merchandising, which is a big school in LA. And then there was another one called LA Trade Tech, which was a technical college, but a lot of the same teachers taught at both. And so I was like, I can afford this one. And between that summer in between, and when I was going to the costume program was when I started working in on shows, because they would call my teacher, my professor, and say, who do you have? We need dressers, like who would be in charge of laundry and doing quick changes. So it's not necessarily technical, but the fact that I could sew, people were like, oh, and she can sew, that was like a bonus. So I ended up working on different shows. Snoopy Rocks on Ice at Knott's Berry Farm. What else did I do? I worked at this big evangelical church, had a huge Christmas and Easter program that they did every year. So I started working those. And in that summer between those two colleges is when I worked at Utah Shakespearean Festival as a stitcher, and spent the summer there. So I worked on the build for one show, and then I dressed 3 shows that summer. So, and then went to the fashion school and started in the fashion school. And at that fashion school was where one of my teachers was Helen Joseph Armstrong. Of the book that I love. So that's where it started. And then I was going for the degree, I was doing the thing, and that was intense. We started with my pattern making class. It was like a 4-hour class, 4 days a week. And it was like a half a semester. And then the next half of the semester we did illustration, which I hated. Like I loved the pattern making, and we'd have to make like 20 patterns a day. It was like pattern making boot camp, and I loved it because I already had a base understanding. But I saw a lot of other students struggling with it, and they're like, "I'm never going to do this. I'm going to be a designer," and I'm like, "Well, you know." So that's where I first started seeing people kind of struggling with how pattern making was taught, and that was very intense. But and then we went into illustration, and I was like, I have to draw like 10 different ruffles. I'm like, my brain is just bored out of my mind. And then I got offered a tour to go on tour with a Broadway show. And I was like, oh, do I finish my degree or do I go on
Draw
tour?
some raffles.
I was like, do I continue to draw ruffles and ruffles and ruffles and hate it my life? Or do I go on tour and take this risk? And I ultimately decided to go on tour because I knew the school would always be there. And I didn't know that this job opportunity would be there when I was ready. So I went off, and then I didn't ever make it back to finishing my degree. It just never worked out. I landed in Las Vegas after that, worked on another show, but I never stopped learning. And that's the key. Every show I was on, anytime somebody was doing something that I didn't know, I would be like, hey, buddy, what you doing? Can I learn about it? And if I discovered Shingo Sato, a few years after that, but I was like, this is amazing. Like, this is the coolest thing I've seen since, I started learning the basics, and just continued to dabble and play and do freelance work so that I could continue learning and continue my skills, because I didn't want to lose that. I didn't want to lose those skills. So that's kind of, and then it just kept going until I started my own business. But
in a way, I think would be the perfect sort of university or something where you work with people all the time, and then you also get to learn and make it formalized. Because I think that's quite often the separation is quite hard. My sense of reality is quite good because all the people who teach there are just professionals. So
yeah,
it is sort of very full on. So you got full on projects, you make them constantly. So it does really prepare you for the fashion industry, like a quick pace and being very self-reliant. So it's a very steep learning curve. And I was similar to you because I loved the sewing and pattern making. Like as soon as I discovered it, that's the thing I loved, and then
yeah,
experimenting and learning more and more. Because a lot of people actually then pay people to do all the stitching and all the pattern making
yeah.
because they just want to
They didn't want to
draw
deal
it,
with it.
and then but that actually really helped me later on with pattern cutting, just being willing to get sort of stuck in and try everything out. I think that's the sort of difference. That's sort of why we're so passionate about it, because you always learn something new just by doing it and trying
Absolutely.
it out.
I agree with that. And I think that it takes a certain kind of person who really likes pattern making, because I think you and I've talked about it before, but I love pattern making because how I approach making something is like, how are we going to figure this out? It's like a puzzle, right? Like
Yeah.
it's that part of it, the figuring it out part is the joy, and so you're going to, when coming from that mindset, you're going to not always figure it out on the first try, but you kind of are okay with that after a while, because you're like, well, that didn't work. What if I try this? And then theater also lends itself to that, I think, a little bit more than fashion too, because that's what they want. So you got to figure it out. And there's no, I'm sure it happens, but you have designers that kind of act that way too. But
Yes, it's very, yeah.
it's a
But
lot
it's
of
probably
problems.
similar. I mentioned with theatre, you and Eva, it's like you're lucky at the sort of Cirque du Soleil, very experimental stuff. It's the same as fashion. You get the very experimental one, and then 90% of it is,
Regular.
t-shirts with slightly different necklines each
Right.
year. But yeah, but 50 of them, and they all have to be slightly different. So it's sort of, it's just the practical stuff, isn't it? So which is still really helpful, but it teaches you skills, but it's a bit different at times and not that exciting.
Yeah, that's true. So I was just
Yeah.
reading some of the chat. So we do have
Yes.
a few who learned from their mom.
Yeah.
Hi, Lala from South Florida, and then Wendy saying she learned from my mom. 6 years hand sewing with a large needle, embroidery set, and never looked back. Wow.
Yeah, I think my mother, because my mother actually trained as an occupational therapist back in the 60s. So she did 4 years of learning everything. She's a bit like a mixture of you and your man, because she can do everything from metalwork to
Oh,
woodwork,
cool.
carpentry, stitching, weaving. But because she did like a career of it for 20 years, she was so over it.
Yeah, she went to,
So
and that
yeah,
happens.
so
That
so
happens.
she would teach me if I asked, but she just was interested in other stuff.
I'm curious in the fashion industry because I just don't know it as well. Do people who like I've noticed Kate from Project Patterns, and by the way, next month over on
Yes.
Carlotta's channel, we're bringing Kate with us. We're going to learn more
Fingers crossed. We've got her. She agreed. So yes, so
tentatively.
hopefully, yes.
So, but so she so stuff for herself sometimes. Is it very
Yeah.
common that people who work in the fashion industry still make things for themselves?
Probably not. I think a problem as well if you're in fashion, you all the designs you design, depending on which company you work for, you get a really good discount.
So
So
you
quite
could buy
often you
those.
get all the clothes you want.
That
So
makes sense.
I always kept on making things, but I think it's not that common that you have people, because also quite like you said, like you have designers at the top, and then you have a pattern cutting room, then you got the technicians and the factory and the samples room. So it's sort of, it's actually more the people who probably are the technicians, they make their own clothes.
Mm,
But a lot of designers are sort of more I think if you are like a designer for the big houses, it's such a stressful job, you probably never have time to make
right.
clothes,
But then
first
you
of all.
would wear the stuff that maybe is
Yes.
produced by that house. That
Yeah.
makes sense.
Yes.
Yeah, in theater, most of us don't have time, or if we
Yeah.
do have time, it's the last thing that we want to do is make stuff first. I when I was working on shows before I had my own business, when I was working on shows in Vegas, I made it a point that only time I would make myself something was for Halloween. And I would start it in like August. I would be like,
So,
okay, because that way I'll get it done by the time it's Halloween.
I was gonna say it's a proper theatrical
Oh,
projection.
yeah, because then you can go
Yeah.
crazy because then it's
Yes.
more on
Yeah.
the costume side, which is why I love and kind of fell in love with that even more so too, is because it's again that challenge of how the heck am I going to make that thing, and you have more
I yeah,
outrageous products.
I always made clothes, but that's also because I'm quite frugal. So I've always, like from early age, I could never quite justify spending money. And then of course, if you work for really nice labels, even
Hmm.
we used to have, I think, £250 a season we could spend. I would
Oh,
buy like one, yeah, but that's two jumpers, out of
yeah,
the whole
yeah,
collection.
yeah,
Like you couldn't
yeah.
afford the coats, so you
Well,
couldn't
you
afford the
got some
dresses.
really nice fabrics. I remember you talking about those
Ah,
tie
yes.
cutoffs, the silks.
Oh yeah, because I'm always the person who goes to the sample room and says, "Oh yeah, there's the bin. Can I have that?" And yeah, so it's sort of all like, even I have boxes full of like knit samples, because again I'm the person who just likes to make something and experiment. Like you said, with Halloween, you go out. But again, with clothes, I quite like getting an offcut of a really random fabric and I was thinking, could that be a dress? It might not be what you normally make a dress of, but it probably work really well.
Oh yeah.
Um, yeah, so
So
it's a joy.
that kind of is how we kind of got started, which is what we
Yes.
said we would talk about. And then when did it switch? So when you started working in these fashion houses, did you start as a pattern cutter or
I actually, because the other thing we're gonna talk about was our low points, and I graduated in 2008, so just after the financial crash.
oh yeah.
So yeah, so I actually was quite lucky that I got like a design assistant, but it was awfully paid and stuff. And then I went and did the pattern cutting degree, just because it was the sort of, there wasn't the jobs I wanted. I didn't quite have the skills because there's so many designers out there for
Right.
junior positions. So I did the really intensive pattern cutting degree, which was a bit like what you said, where you did like 4 hours in the morning just
Yeah.
learning and then 4 hours making lots of stuff. So it
Yeah.
was fantastic. And then I worked freelance as a pattern maker for Met for about maybe a year or year and a half. And I really loved it, but I hated the freelance part of it. So being like dependent on asking designers to pay you, then you always have to look, unless you get really established clients, you always have to look for the next client and then you get
Yeah.
paid. So
Yeah.
it wasn't a very good year for me. And it's just sort of nearly, maybe really stopped me nearly. And then somebody said, "Oh, there's a company. They're really lovely. We're looking for a fashion designer." And I just went there, and I didn't fall in love, but the main designer, she was so lovely. She's still one of my best friends, and I took the job mostly because of her, because she was just so
She was
lovely.
nice. But
And
that's
yes,
important.
yes,
Important
yeah,
when
and
you're
it's sort
hiring
of just,
people.
yeah.
You get
And she's like really inspirational, and that was a great job, just doing fashion design. Again, not very greatly paid. But also what I found, because quite early on I did internships in China, and that's the sort of dirty side of, it's an industrial complex.
yeah,
It's fashion is industry, but that sort of constant churning out hundreds of looks per season, and sort of that whole, like, yeah, 50 different necklines, and it's always the same. And I actually the person I worked back then, he taught me amazing things, because it's sort of about actually appreciating that, yeah, for us it's just maybe quite boring, but for somebody that might be the one dress they buy in a season, and you
right.
still make it special, even if it's,
Yeah,
a 20
yeah.
pound dress
Someone
or
thinks they're
something.
yeah,
Yeah, but it was more with constant, the mass, like, like if you walk into Primark, or it's like Target or
yeah,
H&M,
yeah.
the mass of, yeah,
The same thing.
clothes.
See of the same
Yes.
thing.
So that sort of started putting me off. And I had a lovely job for a lovely small label in Notting Hill, and it was
Mm,
everything you sort of think of fashion. But it's still that you never really get to make stuff, because you are always like making something new, and you're designing for maybe 20 hours a season, and then you have the meetings, and then you're fitting, and the same. So it's like 90% is um
actually getting to create.
yeah, emails.
I know.
So that's sort of, yeah,
Emails. Yeah.
and invoices. Yeah, but it's sort of that sort of when I got more into teaching, because I wanted to share my passion. I was very lucky to get like an in-person teaching at a college, in fashion design, for 19-year-olds, and that was fantastic, because I managed to compress my fashion job into 4 days, and then 3 days,
Mm,
and then teach the other 2 ones, and then you're just like really busy. You're still doing a real thing, and you can also, the students, you can sort of really inspire them to make their own, and whether they do fashion later on or not, they just get the skills
yeah.
to make
Get the
clothes, which
skills.
is great.
And I mean, a few of people even here were saying that that's where they learned was in
Yeah.
school. With home ec. I think yeah, home economics.
Yes,
Went
yeah.
to home economics. That's I don't know if you got call it the same thing over there, but it's
Yeah, we don't. I do textiles, sort of textiles at high
excellent.
school, and fashion. But yeah, I was sort of post school in England, and maybe in the whole of UK.
But
You
I'm
go.
saying you were teaching 19-year-olds, so that
Yes,
that was a post
but
school.
it's a bit like what you did at community college. It's sort of a
Yeah, yeah.
free year of fashion and art education you can do, and you
Ah,
learn everything. It's a fantastic thing that the government did. So you can sort of try things out. I did them myself, about 20 something years ago. But you learn, you have lots of different teachers. You do everything from sculpture to printmaking. So it's a sort of really inspiring place where people are out of school but don't really want to go into
they don't
education.
really know. Yeah.
Yeah, but they
Yeah,
want to
I
try
like
things
that.
out. So it's a really
Yeah.
fantastic place to meet, you know, young creatives. So that was really fantastic. How did you get into teaching, Trisha?
Yeah, so I said I went out
Tour?
on tour. Yeah, I was out on tour for 2 years. It was the Full Monty. If you guys know
Oh,
that show.
yes.
It
Yeah.
started in England, right?
Yes, like Northern England,
Yeah.
Milltown.
And
Yeah.
then they redid it, and it was based in New York. It was
Okay.
based in upstate New York, but that was fun. And then we had some time. It was 2 9-month contracts. So after that summer, I went back and I got back up with my teacher and continued to do stuff. But then then I landed. So during the second tour, I um, I wasn't happy, and so I was looking. And it's like what you're saying with freelance, like you never know. You signed on for that 9 months, but you have to at the end of that 9 months, are they going to ask you again for the next tour, or are you going to go work somewhere for the summer, or are you going to go? You're they're very short contracts, so you're always looking for the next thing. So I was looking for the next thing, and I was kind of frustrated with the company I was working with. So I found this show in Vegas, and applied for it, and we actually stopped in Las Vegas on tour, and I did my interview, and found out the woman, and I was like, it's very. I don't know if this is the same. I would assume it is in the fashion industry, but definitely in the entertainment industry, it's a very common thing to go off of referrals. Like even when you're hiring people, um, so I was like, who do I know in Las Vegas? And those Christmas and Easter shows that I did, the woman who did the costume, she didn't sew. She was like the designer and the curator. She was really good like with crafty stuff. And she worked on one of the Cirque du Soleil shows in Las Vegas. So I thought that was really cool when I was still in school and learning. And I was like, Juliet knows people here in Las Vegas. So when I did the interview, or I asked her, I called my friend and I said, hey, I'm applying for this job. Do you know, do you have any pull? And she had worked with the woman who was hiring my boss on a different show. And so when I went into the interview, I was like, and I know Juliet, and I worked and I threw her name in. And then she called, and I was applying to be a dresser, to do like quick changes because I wanted to work nights. I didn't want to work mornings. I don't function well in the mornings still. So I applied to be a dresser position, but she was having a hard time finding stitchers, finding people who could sew. So when she reached out to my friend Juliet told her I could sew and that I could sew really well. And so when she offered me the job, she's like, I can't offer you a dresser position. We have dressers, but I want to offer you a stitcher position, which paid more. And I'm like, but I have to work in the morning. And I kind of almost didn't take the job because I really wanted to work at nights. And she's like, well, we're figuring it out. We don't know what it is. And they couldn't say what the show was going to be because it wasn't open yet. And it wasn't Cirque du Soleil, but it was like Cirque du Soleil. It was the director who had left Cirque du Soleil, the company, and had started his own company. And it was in a giant pool of water, 1.1 million gallons of water. So it was all stretch. It was like acrobats, circus wear. And so I had very little experience at that time with that kind of stuff. But Juliet had told him I know how to sew. So I was like, all right, I'll go for the sewing job. And when I was there, that's where I kind of buddied up to our pattern maker, who was from Belgium. And actually our costumes were being made in Belgium. The company was from Belgium. So everything was in French. And I was like, hey, sure, Chantal, will you show me? She had a draft for like unitards. And so like on my breaks and stuff, because I wanted to keep learning, I would learn how to do these little half-scale unitard drafts, plug and try it out. And I would, so I learned a lot of stuff there. And what happened over time, and that's an ongoing show. And it actually lasted, the only reason that show closed was because of COVID. It closed during COVID. But it was open for 15 years.
God.
So
and you worked there the whole time?
No, I didn't. Because up until that point, my longest job was like 9 months. So after about 2 years, and it was great because in the beginning we were opening the show, and I came off of a very hectic tour, where it was like one nighters, they call it. So every night we were in a different city. It was very fast paced and very quick. So I was worried again that I was going to get bored if I was just doing the same thing every day on a show. But because that show was opening, it was very fast paced and we were changing, and it was an install. It's called a creation. So I was intrigued and excited and figuring stuff out and enjoyed that process. And then once we were open, most shows, not in that case, but most shows calm down and you do the same thing every day. The owner never really was happy completely. So he always he'd be like, I want to try this time. And I want to try that time. And then the designer would come in and he would want to try something else. So there was always a state of emergency, which in the beginning I was like, this is really cool. I'm not going to get bored. But I did start freelancing at that time. Just to keep my skills up. Like I said, like I was sewing a lot, but I wasn't necessarily pattern making. So I took on some pattern making clients, and then performers kind of wanted to do other things outside of the show. There's a big community there where they do vaudeville shows and things like that. And they wanted costumes for that. And so I started doing freelancing for that. And I stayed with Le Rêve. I think I was there 5 years, but at around year 3, I started getting antsy. I'm like, this is the longest job I've ever had. Like, it's insane and it's crazy still, but I know what it is. Like I know what crazy this is and why am I pushing myself so hard to work for this company? And so I was kind of like looking at what else, where else would I want to go? And I was trying to get in with, because it wasn't Cirque du Soleil, I was trying to get in with Cirque du Soleil because they had so many other shows. So I was like, maybe I could bounce around to different shows. And I was interviewing, and nothing really came of the interviews. I interviewed with different shows and different opportunities for about a year, and my freelance was going crazy though. I was doing lots of freelance work. And then one day it just kind of hit me, which is I realizing I'm telling you my career path and not the teaching path. But I realized it kind of hit me. I was like, maybe I should do my freelance work. Maybe I should turn it into a business and have my own company, which was scary. But I was like, I try to listen to what's going on and go with the flow. And I'm like, that's what's coming in. Maybe that's what I need to be doing. Um, and before I made that leap, I said, well, I'm gonna maybe want something to supplement my income while I'm building up clients enough to pay the bills. So I said, if I could get a job somewhere where I could be like a swing, like part-time work, where they would call me in for vacations or whatever, then I would take the leap of faith and try it. And so I did. I got a swing position, a swing dresser position on Lion King, and I'm like, okay. I said if I got this, I would do it. So I made that, and then part of that. So before that decision came about, when I was working on that show for the 5 years, dressers, where I said there's two different pay scales. Like the dressers is the kind of the entry level wardrobe, and then you have technicians where they get paid a little bit more. They're doing the sewing, the repairs, the fittings, things like that. So they get paid a little bit more. So dressers were asking me, how can I learn more sewing, pattern making, so that I can move up into those positions? And there wasn't, because I had said I went on the tour because I'm like, I can come back to school. So I had already looked and was looking for more of where I could learn, and there really wasn't anything in Las Vegas to learn.
I think that it
So
doesn't exist. It's a real gap in the market that sort of for people who
yeah,
actually do it.
there was a like fashion program at the like an art institute at the time, but it was like a crazy expensive program that I was
Yeah.
like, yeah, not going to be what I need. But so people started telling me that, because this whole time I was like buddying up and learning other things and still working on my skills, and people would say, well, you should teach. And I'm like, what are you talking? I don't even have a degree. Like, I never finished going to school. What do you mean? I'm not a pattern maker. And they're like, you're making patterns, you're a pattern maker. And so I was like, oh, okay, yeah, I guess. I mean, I hadn't even started to wrap my head around how to do that. But it was being asked of me. And so when I made that decision to start my own business, part of that decision making was, well, okay, so I can work part-time on this show, I'm going to be building up my clients, and then maybe, I could teach. Like, that could be another stream of income. So I started really thinking about it. At that time, my mom, who was an educator for her career, my mom and my dad both were educators. So my mom was retiring the same year that I quit my job to start my business. And her and a friend of hers who lived in Las Vegas, what they used to do, what my mom used to do for the state of California, was write grants for education programs. And so she had started this grant writing company with her friend who lived in Las Vegas, and they were like, you're going to quit your job and you want to teach? Like, we can help you get grant money to do this. And that turned it to like this really big crazy thing of like but I had to develop like, what would I teach and what would the outline look like? And then it went into like, would I service underprivileged kids and giving them this skill that would be, and so it turned into like this big crazy thing that didn't actually end up happening. But I had gone through that work to set up how I would teach this. And then I got off. So that first year, you were saying hard times. So that first year was rough because I did have a few clients, but it wasn't enough. I had a horrible client. He was crazy, who just never could decide on designs. And it was just constant, constant, constant. And it would, it was bathing suits or something. And it was a really crazy contract that eventually I was like, I don't even want to make these patterns. Hey,
And I think
Kiki.
the problem as well, if you're sort of hard up for money, you're then like with tricky clients, you really want to make it work, isn't it? And it's
Yeah,
just like
yeah. I
horrible.
tried and I tried and I tried, and he was paying me. Like, they were paying me to keep revisiting these patterns, but I'm like, this is stupid. Just tell me what you want. Um, and and then I got, I was working at Lion King, but I would only work when people were out, so it wasn't all the time. And then I would get like a big cruise. We did a big cruise project, and then it was insane for that project. And then Lion King would call me in, and so it was very hard. And I wasn't making a lot of money. And then but I was building up. And then my friend got a job at Jersey Boys as the head of wardrobe, and he said, hey, do you want to be my assistant? And I was like, how can I open a school, run my own business? Like, how am I going to be able to do it all? He's like, you don't really want to open a whole school for underprivileged kids. And I'm like, you're right. I don't. Like, I don't mind sharing and passing along my knowledge. And he's like,
I think it's always, which is why I went from formal teaching to online teaching in the end, because as soon as you get grant money and government involved, unless you have like a whole team behind you, it's just you end up just writing and writing rather than actually teaching and sharing
right.
skill.
Well, and it became about how can we get this
Yeah,
money instead
yeah,
of helping people that I knew needed help.
yeah,
So he kind of encouraged me. He's like, you don't really want to do that. He's like, I have a friend who used to, because it's nonprofit, all the things, right? And so he's like, I have a friend who used to do classes teaching calligraphy or something. And he was like, they would just do, a 4-hour class and charge for that, kind of like a master class.
yeah.
And he's like, you can do that. And then you can offer it to these people in industry who are wanting this education, and not, these figurative hungry children who needed a new career.
Yeah.
So I was like, yeah, I can do that. So I did take the job with him, as the assistant manager for wardrobe for Jersey Boys, and continued to service my clients and grow my business. And kind of, Jersey Boys allowed me to not have to worry about money. And so everything that I would do on the business side during the day, if I would do a big contract, or I would get like a nightclub gig or something where I would make a lot of money, then I would reinvest it into the business. I would buy a new dress form, buy a new machine, because Jersey Boys was paying my bills. And then that allowed the business to grow. But that first year, it was rough. And then that's where teaching started for me. So then I had developed classes, and because I was starting a business and had a full-time job, I was like, I figure everyone's busy. We'll do like weekend boot camp kind of things. And I got connected because of my mom's grant writing situation. She had ties to the school district out there and was working with them, and they found out that I was teaching pattern making classes, and so they were like, well, our teachers could benefit from this. The fashion teachers in, for high school and for like the home economic programs that they had, would benefit from this. And they have grant money that they have to spend on education. So they were like, please come and teach our teachers. And I'm like, okay. And then they love, so my first class that I taught was half industry people and half teachers. I think we had 21 people signed up, and half of them were teachers. And I was so nervous. I'm like, I've never taught anything before, but I do know this stuff. And they loved it. And they were like, please, because we have this money and we would like to learn from you instead of some theoretical thing. And so then I kept developing classes, and then I would market them to both. And so that started in 2013. And then I moved away from Las Vegas, and people were still wanting classes. So that's when I moved them online and had to learn how to market that again in a different way.
But I think a lot of the best teachers actually don't have a background in teaching. And it's sort of, I have always learned from people who then trained teachers, and same as you, I just sort of, yeah, I know what I wanted them to do, pattern making, after 3 hours. And you
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
use your skills, and in a way, coming from industry where it's always really quick, really
Yeah.
helps, because I think if
Yeah.
you come from teaching, sometimes you have to fill up a whole semester. So you
Right.
do a
That's true.
color in a semester rather than us who say, yes, do 100 colors because you can make a color in an hour. It's sort of, I think in a way sometimes it's quite good to not have gone a teaching degree, because when you're told to do certain things, but if you come from industry, you've learned that anything goes, and that's always where it's most exciting, when you try
Yeah.
something new.
And I think that especially for those who were in the industry who took my classes, it was they could have like I'm an impatient person. Like I said, I didn't want to go to classes that I wasn't going to then go and use right away. So I was like, what can I teach that they're going to walk away with skills that they could actually use and learn, and put into place right away. And so I mean, that was kind of different for the teachers and for the other, but yeah, you're right. It's kind of because you worked in that industry. So you're like, I know what's going to be asked of you.
Yes.
Um,
And you'll
and I,
be making that color in an hour, even if you're saying
yeah,
this.
yeah, and drilling that in. Well, I can't believe it. We could talk all day
Yes,
about
we're
this,
sort of
but
at an hour.
and we haven't even really been interacting with you all. I hope you've been enjoying this. Are there any questions that you guys have on?
Actually, what we're planning in July, which will be the 20th of July, hopefully, is to
Yes,
do a live Q&A. So we're going to do a whole hour, just any questions
just
you have,
answering
because
questions. Thank you for that. Yeah,
yeah.
reminder.
Yes, because I think that's what we found quite often when we have today. It's been more, actually, I've really enjoyed listening to your story, Trisha. So
No,
this
I
has been
did too.
more,
I like hearing different ways that things
yes,
come about.
it's been more about sort of maybe
Yeah, it's
beginners and
okay.
fashion options. But we also love it when we have a session where it's really like you asking questions and us sort of working from that. So
Yeah.
that's what we're planning for next month, just a whole hour on any questions. So you can put them
Any
in
questions
chat,
about
email
pattern
us.
making, pattern cutting?
Oh, Claire's doing a really good question. Is there any area of the industry you would have liked to experience? I actually listen to Trisha especially, but Kate and I have talked about it as well. I would have actually loved to have worked in industry for a few years to actually really then go back to fashion and experience it as fullest, rather than if you're like in your early 20s, you don't really know what you're doing. Because then I would have gotten more into printmaking, and there's lots of areas I would actually like to do more, but yeah,
There's
textiles.
only so much time in the
Yes,
day.
yeah.
And I think that was probably more directed towards you, but I would say I pretty much know every side of making costumes, working in costumes on theater. One thing that I do wish I had more experience with, and I did get a little bit of this, is with, and I know Kate knows a lot about it, but the computerized
Oh,
pattern
yes.
making. I did have access to a program that I played around with a little bit, and I really liked it. But the thing with costuming, where it's different from manufacturing in fashion, is that everything is individual. We're fitting it to that person. We're fitting this to that person. And maybe even if you make 5 of the same thing, they have to fit specifically 5 different people. So you're not standardized grading, you're grading it for individuals. So it just didn't, even though I had access to that program and I took a lot of time to really learn and dive in, and actually that's where I developed my first slopers, was on that, because that was, I wanted to give the teachers at that time a full set of slopers, which I did, and I learned about grading on the computer, because I was doing grading by hand, which was a nightmare. But I wish I had more time with that.
Yeah,
But
you're right. But I think it's once you do that, that's your career for the rest of your life, isn't
right.
it? Sort of, yeah. No, I'd love to do some cats. And it's a Clo 3, the online where you can do the models for
Oh,
fitting, sort of.
yes, where they can.
They become scam. It's sort of quite fascinating.
It is fascinating. I
But
like
I
it.
like
And
getting my hands in is a problem. So I would like to do it for a bit, because I always loved Illustrator working as well. I really
yes,
like that
yes.
side of fashion.
And I think that like indie pattern makers, that's kind of the route that they go more often, because those programs like Gerber, Electra, the one that I was using, they're like $7,000,
Yeah,
$10,000, $20,000 programs, and you have to have a big plotter.
yeah.
So just
And
what
buy the updates, all that sort of stuff.
yeah. So it wasn't feasible to me, even though I had access to the program. Every time I would jump on, I didn't use it enough. So I was like, how do I do that again? Like I knew what I wanted the pattern to do, but I had to find the button that made it do that thing. And so it just ended up being, I had too many gaps in between sitting down and trying to do it that I didn't learn it as well as I wish that I had. But I think, and I wonder, that would be a great question for Kate. And we're hoping Kate from Project Patterns is going to join us next month. But I know she's very proficient in computerized great pattern making. But she didn't start with the computer, right? She started by hand drafting. Or
Yeah,
did
well,
she?
I'm pretty sure she did both maybe in her degree, and then yeah, so we can ask her next week, next
Yeah,
month.
because I always, I mean, I think it's a really great skill to learn how to do on the computer, but I think that you still would, it would benefit you to start, because a lot of
Yeah,
people I hear from students, I don't know if you hear this as well, but a lot of students want to learn digital pattern making and they want to go ahead and jump into digital pattern making, but I really think it's important for you to learn on paper
yeah.
first.
Because I think it becomes too abstract otherwise. You have to sort of
Yeah.
understand what happens when you cut it open and stuff. No, I agree. But you should ask Kate next week, but
Yeah,
um,
that's a great question for Kate for sure.
yes.
That's going to be on Charlotta's channel, so make sure you're
20th of
following both of.
July, our usual time.
Yes, our usual time, which is our 3 p.m. Eastern or 8 p.m. UK.
Yes.
So, thank you guys all for joining us. I hope that you enjoyed hearing about our journey. If you have more questions for us, bring them next month. We're happy to answer more questions about that. And I just hope that, like I shared in my Instagram stories, I think that, some people just want to learn how to make clothes and how to make patterns for themselves. And that's great, and it's wonderful. And some people do have aspirations to be independent pattern makers, or go into the industry or go into the entertainment industry and make costumes. And so I think that it's good to hear different stories of how people get there. And in my case, I wasn't a traditional path that I took, and that's, both of us offer how to learn pattern cutting in not a traditional way either. I mean, it's more about what you do with the knowledge that you get, and how dedicated you are to learning it, what you can then do with that knowledge. It doesn't necessarily have to be the same thing. Wendy asked one question: what has been your favorite design?
You know what? We should keep it for next month because we can get a photo. I'm
Yeah,
gonna make a note.
that's a hard question, Wendy. But Charlotte will
Maybe
keep
we
track.
should do our best and worst designs.
Best and worst. That's a good idea. Oh yeah, I've got a few. I've got
Yes.
some crazy ones. So yeah, we'll save that one. That's a good question for next time. Thank you guys so much for those of you who joined live and those of you watching the replay. You know that you can find us either on mine or Charlotta's channels towards the end of the month, usually on a Thursday. Next month it'll be the 20th of July. So hopefully we'll see you then. And thank you so much. Oh, good. Thank you, Claire. She said she enjoyed hearing our stories. But we'll see you next time. Thanks so
Yes.
much.
Thank
Bye.
you for watching. Bye.
How do I do this?